Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's call. This is the Conversation for Grantmakers that is being hosted in partnership between Philanthropy New York, the New York Funders Alliance, and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. This conversation came to be as we were talking amongst the regional associations in the campaign on how does it bring information to all of the New York State funding community. This is the first of 4 conversations that we will be hosting over the next 4 months. Our series goals include bringing education to both regional associations, connect New York funders to educational resources and local networks working on education reform, providing an introductory framework for both regional associations within their education arena, and building the groundwork for expanding education philanthropy statewide and coordinating those efforts to the best of our ability, and sharing engagement pathways for funders to the national initiative. I'm pleased today to tell you that we have an incredible lineup of speakers to bring this education opportunity to you. Before we get started with our speakers, I just want to let you know that our phone call today is being recorded so that we can share it with both of our networks. As everybody knows, schedules don't always permit everybody to be on the line. So we've gone ahead and taken the necessary precautions to assist our speakers, so your phones have been muted. But we want you to participate in this conversation to the extent that you would like to. You will notice that at the bottom of your screen you have a chat window. Our presenters today will be following that conversation. So if you have questions, you can use that chat window to talk to specific presenters or to send a question to the entire panel. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker today. Ron Fairchild is a senior consultant in his current position as President and CEO of the Smarter Learning Group, a national education consulting firm. Ron helps cities and communities identify proven solutions and strategies to improve public education. Prior to starting his firm, Ron served as the founding CEO of the National Summer Learning Association. He was also the executive director of its predecessor organization, the National Center for Summer Learning at Johns Hopkins University. Under Ron's leadership, the organization grew from a local program to a national intermediary organization, working with a 50-state network of more than 5,000 summer learning providers that collectively serve more than 2 million children. His early positions as the Director of Education Programs for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America and as Education Associate with the Public Education Network helped him see the breadth of an organization that could provide wonderful learning opportunities for children. Ron also brings with him 3 years of education experience in teaching in the classroom. Ron's role within the campaign is he serves as the lead community solutions assurance of the campaign. He is responsible for managing the National Community Support Center, which delivers technical assistance in the areas of school readiness, attendance, and summer learning to more than 140 communities across the country that are engaged in efforts to move the needle on third grade reading proficiency. And with that, I would like to turn it over this morning to Ron.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and I'd like to thank all of you for participating in the conversation today. I'm really excited to provide an overview and introduction of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, just a quick context-setting piece at the beginning, and then turn it over to our other presenters who are going to go into greater depth on school attendance component of the campaign. I have the good pleasure of directing the Network Community Support Center for the campaign. And the first slide is that I wanted to cover today is really a graphic that describes the framework and the architecture of the campaign, which really began by addressing this central question of how we disrupt intergenerational poverty in this country. We know for all of our innovation and all of the creativity that we have not come up with a durable solution to how to break cycles of intergenerational poverty in this country. We know that high school graduation is the door to future opportunities, and increasingly the research is clear and compelling that third grade reading proficiency is the key to opening that door. It's one of the single best predictors we have for later success in school and in life, and it has proved to be a galvanizing result that has brought together communities around these central assurances of quality teaching in every setting, of creating a more seamless system of early learning and early grades, bringing together a wide group of stakeholders and local communities to address some of the barriers that even our best schools, our best teachers, and our best curricula struggle with kids who show up for school unprepared to take advantage of what school has to offer, who miss too much school, and who experience too much of a setback during the summer months. And all of this work, we began with 124 communities and now working with more than 230 across the country. And we have this bold goal of reaching by 2020 at least a dozen states. We want to help them increase by at least 100% the number of low-income kids who are reading proficiently. The next slide describes our network as it currently exists. Again, more than 230 communities in 42 states. The real energy and the momentum behind all of these stars continues to be the engagement and support of local foundations and local investors. And we have said with a very consistent message that the primary and most important role in all of this is for local philanthropy to engage with their community and support these efforts. And we've encouraged folks to keep money locally and to actually invest in the local communities through the development of a planning process, and then most importantly, to help communities actually implement those plans. As a way of getting started, I wanted to just get a sense from those of you on the line what your engagement has been with the communities in the state of New York, and maybe we can drill in a little bit in that one state on the map. And if you could take a couple of minutes as we're going through this to complete the poll that you can see now, that would be incredibly helpful so that we have a sense of who's on the line and what roles you are playing. I would also encourage you to feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to facilitate a conversation as we move through this. I wanted to say thank you to the 7 communities that are engaged in the campaign in the state of New York, also to Cynthia O'Connor and Corinne Ribble, who serve as the technical assistance team for the state. Cynthia is our campaign state lead in New York, and we are fortunate to have 7 communities currently engaged. And the next slide gives you a sense of the richness and the diversity of the types of organizations that are in leadership roles within the communities. The variation, I think, just in terms of size and scope of the efforts, and also a sense that this is an effort that continues to be dynamic and grow. We're excited to see new communities join. As I said, when we launched the network back in 2012 at 124 communities, we continue to see growth in that network over time, and we continue to welcome new cohorts of communities on every 6 months and 6-month intervals for the campaign. The next slide really describes, I think, the milestone that our team at the Network Community Support Center is really focused on. We know that 2020 is a long way off. We needed a concrete and specific milestone that we could reach by the end of next year. And a critical component to the overall campaign strategy is to invest early in establishing proof points in local communities that actually provide the evidence and the inspiration and the motivation for others to continue to work in these areas. And the best thing we've seen that actually gets people to suspend cynicism and disbelief is to point them to places that are actually working, help understand why things are working and where they're working, so that we can establish as proof points around these community solutions of school readiness, school attendance, summer learning, and reading proficiency in the early grades. And we're beginning to see communities that are addressing the progress indicators on the next slide, places that we can actually point to that are reducing the number of kids who show up with undetected, untreated undiagnosed conditions and developmental delays that impede their learning in the early grades. We've seen communities make heavy investments in early developmental screening, referrals and follow-up, increasing the number of kids that are ready for kindergarten on the first day. We also have seen communities make dramatic reductions in chronic absenteeism. And we're going to hear a lot about strategies that are working to address this particular challenge on this call. And also the next slide on specific progress indicators related to summer learning. It's been incredibly rewarding for us to see that not only are these three issues defined and backed up by a really strong research base, but they actually prove to be amenable to improvement in a measurable fashion over a particular periods of time in communities. And we're starting to see those examples. Last year we named 30 pacesetter communities that are implementing strategies that show measurable progress on student-level outcomes in each of these three areas of readiness, attendance, and summer. The next slide is the first of three that provide kind of a strategic overview of the three issues, the three community solutions areas that we've defined. And we're really not going to have time today to get into a great deal of depth on these, but suffice to say, the communities have identified strategies that are working, that are actually leading to results, and we're trying to lift those up the best way we know how and to encourage people to engage in peer learning about those strategies that are proven to be successful. School readiness, school attendance, and summer learning. Some of the common elements that we see is a real focus on community-wide messaging, a focus on implementing, scaling, replicating those proven and promising practices, programs, and policies that are really critical to addressing these issues, expanding access to opportunities, really driving with data and building more cross-sector coordination and partnership. The next slide that I wanted to describe a little bit is what we see as the future of our work in these three areas of readiness, attendance, and summer. And this slide we sort of refer to as either the bingo card or the twister board. And we do that because it, I think, illustrates how we're seeing communities not just make small-scale progress on readiness, attendance, and summer, but actually go into greater depth by paying attention to four cross-cutting issues. One, we know that we need to help parents succeed in their critical roles with respect to readiness, attendance, and summer. We need to engage the broader public health community in these issues, and then until and unless we address some of the health determinants of early school success, our efforts to address readiness, attendance, and summer are going to be compromised. And we know that technology holds plays a pretty critical role in whether or not we can succeed in scaling much of this work. And communities are really beginning to focus increasingly on the role of public housing and really targeting kids and families who live in public housing as a priority population, as one that has been historically underserved, and ways that we can address those issues. The next two slides are infographics that illustrate the ways in which we framed the work around supporting parent success. And this is a real change, I think, and a shift in the way we're talking about parents and the parent roles. I think historically, folks have talked a lot about parent involvement or parent engagement in terms of how do we get parents to do what we need them to do and to join our agenda. And what we've tried to do, and I think begun to see in communities, is a real shift to say we really need to be about is supporting parents in the important and critical roles that they play as their child's first teacher, brain builder, and most important role model. The next infographic shows the work, I think describes the work on what we're talking about in terms of the health determinants of early school success. Some folks talk about the social determinants of health. We're talking about some of the key barriers and obstacles that exist to early school success, and specifically early reading success. Things like hearing and vision screenings, things like the importance of making sure that kids have access to breakfast, to timely and regular dental care, to healthy, nutritious meals over the summer months, and physical activity over the summer months. So I hope those infographics will be helpful and useful to you. I wanted to wrap up by just talking a little bit about some steps for joining the campaign and participating, because I think there are probably folks on this call who might be interested in joining this network and supporting communities in joining this network. We've got a lot of information online at gradelevelreading.net. We basically ask folks to do three things. One is to convene a cross-sector sponsoring coalition, so to really get a big tent of folks mobilized and engaged in the effort. Two, to develop a plan, a community solutions action plan, using our framework or something similar to that that was developed with our initial cohort of communities. And then to actually engage and secure local public and private investment to support implementation. And so those are the three components to joining the campaign. And the next slide talks about some of what we've learned. You're going to hear a lot more about some of these lessons learned as we get into the specific and deeper conversations about school attendance, school readiness, and summer learning. But as much as anything else, I think the campaign has provided a helpful framework, not a new to-do list for local communities. We know folks are quite busy, and I think we've been successful over the last several years in helping folks focus on these key barriers and these key obstacles to grade level reading around school readiness, school attendance, and summer. We've seen growing momentum and continuing to see communities join the network, and really focusing on how we embed the campaign, the priority focus around grade level reading into existing structures and systems, so that implementation not only happens over a short period of time, but really builds towards something that's more durable and sustainable, and it's going to get us to where we need to go by 2020 and beyond. So with that, I'm going to transition to the folks who are going to be leading the conversation on attendance. We know that attendance is an essential ingredient in academic success. This goes into the category of research providing the footnotes for good common sense, and that kids need to be in school and attending every day in order to have achievement and then educational attainment over time. And we are joined by three terrific speakers today who are going to do a deeper dive on the attendance issue. Hetty Chang, the founder and director of Attendance Works, Sue Fothergill, who's a senior policy associate for Attendance Works, and Barbara Hubble, who's the director of community impact at the United Way of the Southern Tier. And as we transition to our three speakers on attendance, we have another poll for you. And it gives us, I think, a little bit of a window on your background and your existing level of work with respect to chronic absenteeism and issues of attendance. So with that, I will turn it over to Hetty.
Great, thanks. So I'm also looking at the poll results. Thank you, Ron. Always a pleasure to be partnered with Ron in the campaign. It looks like there's only one person who's not so familiar, and some of you who are somewhat familiar, and a couple who know more. We're going to do a little review of some things, but I think we can go relatively fast. And what we're going to talk about first is just making sure that you kind of understand from the research, from the data, why we think this matters so much, generally but particularly for New York. And Sue will be joining me to talk more about the New York specific pieces. So first of all, I just want to make sure everyone knows what we mean by chronic absence. Chronic absence is missing so much school for any reason that a student is academically at risk. That's including excused, unexcused absences, and suspensions. It's different from truancy, which is just unexcused absences, and it's quite different from average daily attendance, which is how many kids show up each day. So this is actually data both from California and then New York City. California data show, this is actually from 6 schools with chronic absence, with 95% average daily attendance, but as you can see, their chronic absence levels vary significantly. The other slide is actually data from New York City. It's schools with 90% attendance, but you can see they actually have somewhere between 20–26% chronic absence. And that's because if you have 200 kids in a school, 10 kids who don't show up, it's not the same 10 kids every day. The question is how many kids are actually typically sitting in those seats. It's not every day, but it's pretty often. It could, well actually what you don't know unless you add up, is it that 50 kids are missing 20 days, which is 1,000 absences that would leave 800 absences left over if that was a 180-day school year? This is really one of those measures that you have to look up, just like test scores from individual kids, to see for how many kids is this a problem, and the aggregate numbers can mask high levels. And if you're seeing as much as 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 kids chronically absent, it's not just the education of the child who's missing too much school that is at risk. It's the education of actually all the kids in the classroom, because teachers are then really struggling with how they can deal with the classroom churn. And there's actually new research out from a guy named Michael Godfrey that shows kids who are low income, girls, kids with disabilities are affected even more when their peers are chronically absent, because it's disrupting the classroom experience. What we know is that unexcused absences can mask high levels of chronic absence, especially in the early grades. This is data from my own school district where, if you just looked at chronic absence, you would miss maybe half the kids in kindergarten, because so many of those young children are not missing without someone calling in with some kind of excused absence and saying they're missing. And what we know from New York City schools, this is when they first calculated their data. New York City was actually one of the very first major places, aside from Baltimore, to look at chronic absence. And what they found is, even though they had something called a 407 alert, that was an indicator of risk for the child welfare system, that 407 alert, which was looking for consecutive absences, was actually missing large numbers of kids who were sporadically absent. So it was 1 out of 5 elementary school children in New York City. By the way, on the positive note, New York City's chronic absence levels have actually decreased over time because of the work that they've put in place. We know this matters. The data shows this matters. This is actually data showing that whether you show up or not starts to make a difference as early as preschool. And if you look at the far right, that 72.9, those are the kids who are chronically absent in pre-K, K, and first, and by 2nd grade they're needing intensive intervention in reading. We know from research from Rhode Island that kids who are chronically absent in kindergarten, if you track them all the way out, this is one of those things you have to actually look at the impact over time. If you were chronically absent in kindergarten in Rhode Island, you had lower achievement as you continued in your school experience, and the gap grew larger. Because if you're chronically absent in kindergarten, and then you show up by the time you're in 3rd grade, now you can't read, all the other things that the grade level reading campaign talks about fall into place. So now you can't read, so now you're going to fall behind in your other subjects. So these kids were more likely to be retained, more likely to be suspended. They might now start to act out because they actually can't keep up with what's up in the classroom. And they're more likely to continue to be chronically absent. And we know that this even gets worse by the middle and high school grades, when now you have such scaffolded subjects You know, for those of us with middle and high school kids, we know our kids can't miss algebra or trigonometry because we actually can't teach to them. So those kind of scaffolded subjects, as soon as kids are chronically absent, it increases their chances of dropout pretty significantly. What we know nationally is that about 1 out of 10 kids are chronically absent. It's about some communities it's 1 out of 3, and it's something that affects our youngest students as well as those in middle and high school. One of the challenges, and this connects to some of the concepts that were in Ron's earlier slides, like the opportunity quartile, like the need to focus in public housing, but low-income students, the most vulnerable populations, and this also has some racial ramifications, are more likely to be chronically absent in the very earliest of grades. So this is Rhode Island data again, 24% versus 7% of kindergartners. 24% of the low-income kindergartners are chronically absent. It's high in all the grades, but for our youngest kids, they never almost even get a chance to learn. Now, the key to solving chronic absence is taking a moment to figure out why. Why are they chronically absent? Because our solutions have to respond to the whys. Is it missed because folks don't understand that sporadic absences are actually adding up, or they think that attendance only matters in the older grades? Or is it these real barriers, chronic disease, asthma? This is why the dental care, the asthma issues were so key. Unstable housing, poor transportation, trauma, or is it the issues of aversion? Because in fact, it's not a positive school climate. Families feel disengaged from the educational process, or even the school instruction isn't very good, and kids and families are actually walking with their feet. Your solutions are different, and sometimes you have multiple ones of these challenges going on, and then you're going to have to figure out solutions that are comprehensive, that really address all of them. It is also true that you can use your data to figure that out. If kids who are chronically absent come from a particular neighborhood, find out what's going on in that neighborhood. If it's concentrated in a particular classroom, in a particular school, you can use both quantitative data as well as the insights of kids, families, and community partners to identify what's going on. Ultimately, this is really about taking a more public health approach to improving attendance, where we have a Tier 1 that's all about setting the expectations, tracking, monitoring, looking for those common barriers, and then doing more personalized outreach when that isn't enough. And then you start to do the intensive case management, the more legal responses. And the big challenge that we've had as a country is that we have not invested in Tier 1 and Tier 2. We've resorted too quickly to very expensive legal strategies, which in fact then are not so effective because they're overwhelmed with too many cases. And what we really have as an opportunity is to implement Tier 1 and Tier 2. In order to do this, communities have to put in place actionable data. We need to know as soon as possible when kids are chronically absent. And in New York State, by the way, New York State, like California, you don't have attendance data in the longitudinal student data system that your state maintains. So you're really going to have to make sure that your data is there at the district level. This is both for actionable data and also shared accountability, because it's your districts that have the data that they can use to see how many kids over the course of the year or at any point in the school year are chronically absent. So key is having the data to look at the issues, unpack the issues, and in your case you need to make sure that's happening at the local level, because that's the only place where this data exists. Then we need to have capacity building so folks can interpret the data. My biggest fear is that data will come out and people will blame families for not being there, when in fact what they're facing is some pretty significant hurdles and challenges, and what they most need is us to help unpack what are those hurdles and help them address it. So we need to help people to understand how to promote a tiered system of response as described earlier and use their data well. And we need to engage in positive messaging, really making sure that we have positive relationships with people in schools, but also community partners. You know, you can have a school nurse, you can have a public health nurse, you can have a doctor, for example, talking about how absences shouldn't not add up and helping to make sure these things are in place. Ultimately, the reason why these bright spots are so important, this is kind of why we want to have these proof points, if you will, is that when you can engage, and we've seen this happen in states, starting to happen in a number of states, in localities, engage in innovative practice, and then you bring those localities together. They can teach each other. They can also inform what state organizations do so that then they can help take the work to scale. In terms of policy, in terms of technical assistance, in terms of regulation and guidance. So that's how we've seen this work happen. Connecticut nearby, if you ever want to know more, is an excellent example of how we're even starting to see statewide reductions in chronic absence because we've had local innovation that's informed state policy, practice, and legislation. And with that, I want to turn to Sue for a moment. Can you tell us more about the local innovation that's happening in New York State?
Yes, I can. So you've heard from Hetty from our theory of action how we believe that local innovation can inspire action to address chronic absence. In New York State, there are several examples of community innovation. Chemung County, who you're going to hear from later, Portland and Madison counties, along with Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. I'm going to focus just briefly on the work underway in New York City as part of the campaign for grade level reading sponsored by the local United Way. They have a targeted initiative in the Mott Haven neighborhood of the Bronx focused on 7 elementary schools with chronic absence rates that range from 30 to 45% of the student population, some of the highest rates in New York City. The initiatives include site-based coaching support to develop peer strategies using their data, along with opportunities for peer networking and professional development. Additionally, the United Way is learning about systems and policy issues that are contributing to chronic absence, such as housing instability. At the state level, you have a fantastic public awareness campaign, Every Student Present. The campaign is designed to help the community understand the impact of chronic absence. The website includes access to research, flyers, PSAs, and toolkits to help communities take action on this issue. There are people and organizations across the state working to put in place systems and strategies to reduce chronic absence. And the things that are being learned from those efforts are informing national dialogue, along with inspiring local and state practice and innovation. Thank you.
So thanks, Sue. I also just want to make sure that you know that we are really seeing a federal spotlight, interagency spotlight being focused on this. As part of My Brother's Keeper, the federal government has announced the Every Student Every Day national initiative to reduce chronic absence. And they have a whole set of resources and supports that are starting to be put in place. It's a little bit of a build the ship while flying it. We had an amazing virtual summit on November 12th with thousands of people signed up and joining. And if you want to know more about that, you can go there. But the most important thing I think you might want to think about on this list of activities that are happening is that in the this spring, we're going to have the first ever national chronic absence data release. And that's OCR has been collecting data on the numbers of kids who have missed 15 or more days for any reason. And they will be releasing that, and it will be available by state, I think by district. And for states like New York, it will be the first time you'll actually have an estimate of how many kids are missing so much school for any reason that they're academically at risk. So let me talk about just a few of the things that funders can do. You can promote and invest in these local efforts to calculate and address chronic absence. You can create opportunities for peer learning. You can leverage your position as a bully pulpit, as a funder, or grants to help statewide organizations and policymakers learn about the issue and consider its implications. And you might explore how New York as a state might leverage the federal Every Student Every Day activities, including the OCR data release, and also their spring summit, which will invite state teams to participate. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Barbara to talk about one of your own who's actually doing such fabulous, wonderful work. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Hetty. I'm pleased to be on the call today, and we thought it might be important to have a view of the campaign from a funder's perspective. So for us, how was it that we actually became involved with the campaign for grade level reading? We were relative latecomers, actually. Some professionals and volunteers that were involved with the Chemung School Readiness Project suggested that we become a campaign community. And it was timely for United Way, the Southern Tier, because we were embarking on a strategic planning process. And many of you know that United Way Worldwide has encouraged since 2008 the entire United Way system to focus on education from cradle to career. The campaign for grade level reading is all about what it takes to read proficiently by third grade, which has become our focus here locally. And it's a framework that we can easily use with our existing partners where we already have our investments. And clearly for us, the reputation of the Casey Foundation means that the campaign for grade level reading is credible. And the support that we get from the network of other communities, both state and national efforts, has really proven to be very beneficial, especially as we have been in startup. And why now? Why would we do this now? The need for United Way, the Southern Tier, to evolve and become more relevant was painfully obvious to us. And this happens to almost everybody. As you see here, this is a diagram of the business life cycle. You might hear of it as forming, storming, and norming, or the S-curve. When a business reaches the top of the arc, if they don't evolve, they wither and die on the vine. And United Way was ticking right along when we had the corner on the market for workplace giving. But that position waned in recent years with a different generation of givers who have any number of giving opportunities right at their fingertips. And they're wanting a more focused investment and greater return on that investment. So we embarked on a strategic planning process that had really strong community voice to guide our evolution. And with that, we got a new value proposition. So instead of being simply a pass-through organization, we've increased our relevance by focusing on what people care about and where they can really make a difference. The work we're doing aligns with their philanthropic goals, what they told us was important to them, increasing donor satisfaction and giving, as we all know is really important. And these focused efforts give donors direct access to something they're passionate about and they can sink their teeth into, increasing our relevance. So the work that United Way does is clearer now than it's ever been, much easier to articulate to donors and to the community at large. And the donors are going to be better able to see what impact their gift makes, which is important to them. The product is much more tangible, which is better for our brand recognition and donor loyalty. And people are more likely to engage not only with their money, but with their voice and their time and their talents, which helps everybody. And our strategic planning process made it clear that in addition to meeting the basic needs of food, clothing, shelter, that sort of thing, helping kids be successful was the most important thing to the community. So we had to ask the question, what does that mean? And we let the research lead the way. What the experts revealed was that early education, school readiness, parent supports, being in school were key to long-term success. If you really want to change the situation, you've got to change the situation. So for us, pouring money on Band-Aid fixes at the back end with little or no results isn't working, and that's the case for many funders. And we've got to do better on the front end. So everything, as you've heard previously in this session, everything points to third grade reading as a pivotal milestone and one of the greatest predictors of success in school and in life. We adopted a focus on the birth to 8 continuum for our 2-county region, and we don't have a moment to lose, folks. Our investments are changing to reflect that focus, and we've embarked upon this work using a collective impact lens, which is the evolution of the science of impact and social change. And we all know that none of us can do this alone. So when we said, how do we do this, it didn't take us long to zero in on what works. Many larger United Way communities were having success with a cradle-to-career approach using tools like Strive, Ready by 21, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and Attendance Works. And as a smaller United Way and a smaller community with less capacity, we couldn't take on the entire cradle-to-career spectrum. But the Campaign for Grade Level Reading seems almost tailor-made to what our focus has become, and it all ties together and really delivers on that cradle-to-career work. United Ways have been tapped to drive this work because we tend to be seen as impartial, apolitical, and non-threatening, even though we're a funder. So we're careful to say when we're at tables doing this work that we are not the experts in early childhood development, although some larger United Ways have staff who are. We are practitioners in collective impact and bringing people together, making connections around a shared vision, helping to organize all of our efforts. And we needed to build upon the success already realized in Chemung County while bringing Steuben County, the neighboring county, up to speed because we cover that two-county region. And digging into the indicators here, you can see we're making progress with getting kids ready to enter school, but we still have a long way to go. Our chronic absence rates are nearly twice the national average that Hetty spoke about, and fewer than half our kids are reading proficiently by the end of third grade. Obviously, graduation rates are telling about long-term success. We got a lot going on here. And with this new value proposition for United Way, we've changed how we engage with key stakeholders. People are starting to look at this work as a shared responsibility across sectors rather than fiefdoms. Thought leaders and subject matter experts are coming together. Local funders, large and small, and United Way meet quarterly to discuss our work and how we might invest collectively in key areas to realize a greater return. For often small amounts of money, we can make a big difference, like providing incentives for improved attendance for after-school programs. It's really some pretty powerful stuff for a little bit of money. Business and manufacturing sectors are beginning to look at early childhood literacy as a long-term workforce strategy and not just something nice to do for kids. They can be one of our best advocates when speaking with policymakers about the importance of this work. Albeit slowly, we're changing systems to deliver on the outcomes. And as it aligns with the campaign for grade level reading, Chemung County already has a robust school readiness project with universal home visitation, quality early care and education, parent supports, and making sure kids have access to health care, and a universal developmental screening, which they talked about earlier. The community action plan that we submitted to become a grade level reading community was based not only on what we had learned from our experience here, but also expanding that vision to include what happens once the kids hit the kindergarten door. Beginning at birth, building the competencies to hit the ground running when they get to school, and making sure they show up every day reading proficiently by age 8. And as I mentioned, Steuben County is quickly coming up to speed, having done a significant year-long planning process, bringing together all of the key stakeholders. They're now beginning their implementation. So that's exciting stuff. And although for many years, since the mid-90s, we've had the county schools leadership group, which is district superintendents, county department heads, like the Department of Social Services, Child Protective Services, the Youth Bureau, probation, mental health, and others. United Way represents the nonprofit provider community at that table. Our efforts in improving attendance are actually relatively new. 3 years ago, the group began thinking about how to use this systems-level horsepower in a preventive way rather than solely for responding to problems. Poor attendance in the early grades quickly surfaced as a common problem. If they're not in the seats, they can't learn. We know this. So we dug around to gather more information, which led us to Attendance Works and research by Hetty Chang, Bob Belfens, and others, and we were astonished by what we discovered. Soon after, we had a handle on our own local data, and it wasn't pretty, as you saw in an earlier slide. The group has jumped in with both feet, breaking into various subgroups to address different components of the issue, including a group that impacts the reasons for absence. We're working to improve data reporting mechanisms currently and build public awareness, which is pretty key, and engage our after-school programs as part of the solution. We already have money in those after-school programs. Let's use those as a lever. And we support, with our support from the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, this has just been critical for us. They've been wonderful in helping us find things that we didn't know already existed. And for the summer opportunities, our summer program providers have come together, including the library system, community action agency, nonprofits, municipal recreation programs, and Summer Cohesion, which is our largest summertime child care provider, to talk about infusing reading and STEM-based curricula into summer recreational and feeding programs. United Way and other funders provided nominal resources to purchase the books and materials to outfit every location to deploy a standard curriculum over the past 2 years. And now 1 hour of every day at every site in every summer program is focused on STEM-based reading and complementary hands-on activities. Hosting a large share of our community's kids, this is also a great platform on which we can reinforce the importance of being in school on time every day. And we are working through the logistics of data measurement, but we know that this can't hurt. So we've all but scrapped our former individual volunteer efforts for a revamped corporate engagement program. Our local Fortune 500 company, Corning Incorporated, wanted community projects as regular team-building activities, and we were happy to help. And that has expanded to multiple companies and scores of volunteers. We're now cultivating relationships and finding projects suitable for large groups of volunteers, aligning with our focus on early learning and family supports to the extent possible. There are material projects like book and diaper drives, as well as hands-on projects like conducting science-based activity sessions, reading to kids, tutoring, building born learning trails, and more. It's really connecting donor passion with community need in a hands-on way that makes them feel good. And this involvement, as we know, is going to begin to build our next generation of donors. And our lessons learned so far is change equals risk. As funders, we tend to be risk aversive, but no change also equals risk, folks. If we want certainty, we'll get the same results by doing what we've been doing. We've got to go out on a limb here and understand that the science is leading the way. Funder versus partner, and it's got to be about the learning. Every partner at the table in this work must be willing to give up ultimate control for the importance of gauging all the voices without fear of reprisal. If folks at the table think they're going to be in trouble for what they're reporting, they're going to fudge their numbers, and none of us wants that. We must have tolerance for failure along the way and embrace the learning that results. From turf to trust happens at the speed of relationships. I love that one. And this work is not likely to happen in one funding cycle. We've learned that, and we've got to have a little patience and a little tolerance. Going too slow, we're not making progress. If we go too fast, we're not inclusive enough. We don't have the right people at the table. And we've got to all believe and have hope in what we're doing by adopting a can-do attitude. It's really critical that everybody at the table has to believe that we're going in the right direction and doing the right thing. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Just start. If you wait to have everything in place, you're never going to get started. And the challenge is getting hung up on what we must accomplish versus getting it roughly right. So just jump in. And we're not alone in our challenges. One of the greatest things about the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Attendance Works and all of the people doing this work is that we're supporting and learning from each other. And I will tell you, it has been a remarkable experience for us. And I appreciate everything that the folks are doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and Sue and Eddie. I think it's a great series of points made. Before I ask Corinne if there are questions that we could address from the chat box, I wanted to just ask all three of you, any reflections on how much progress you think is reasonable to expect over what period of time? If folks have crunched their numbers and they know they have a problem, how much progress can they make over what period of time? What have you seen as examples both in New York and around the country?
I can take a stab at that, Ron, speaking just specifically to that indicator of chronic absence. And one is that the progress, I will say, is predicated on how well you're actually putting in that tiered system of supports, where you're both putting in the positive messaging, and the kind of it's more letting people know that how absences can't add up, sharing information about why you really shouldn't miss as little as two days a month, to then doing more intensive engagement. So for example, in New York City, the Success Mentors approach, where they have someone who reaches a kid every day and reaches out to them and checks in with them. And in those cases, you can when you put in place that Tier 1, Tier 2, you can actually see some pretty significant reductions in chronic absence. If you really have it going on as a whole system, as a school, I think you might even be able to see from baseline a 20% reduction. But usually a lot of people we're seeing is trying to put in place a 10% reduction in chronic absence. So let's say you had 10% chronic absence, that's talking about a 2% reduction, 10 to 8%. But if you're talking about a 30% reduction and you're seeing a 20% reduction, you'd be looking at a 6% reduction. Sorry, this is, it's really from baseline. And it really is predicated on putting in place these interventions and putting them in place just as you're starting up the school year. If you try to do an intervention mid-year, it's harder to see reductions because you're sort of swimming upstream because kids have already missed so much school that they're falling behind, and you have to do remediation for that period of time along with the attendance. If you can start it in the beginning of the year and capture those kids before they even get off track, you can see greater results. I don't know, Sue, do you have anything to offer from your Baltimore experience in particular or what you're seeing in New York City?
I agree with the rates that you're talking about, Hetty. So the 20% reduction at the beginning, at the end of the year of implementation in Tier 1, Tier 2 is perfectly reasonable. I see that more communities in their first year of getting started feel more comfortable with the 10% goal so that they can get to know the strategies and really think through implementation and then strive for a higher rate the following year after they've had a year of learning. But they all feel really comfortable with 10%.
Great. Barbara, any perspective on that?
Well, I think that our first year in this was actually getting people to agree that we needed to make forward momentum and actually digging into the data and understanding that we had a problem. As Hetty referred to earlier, the difference between average daily attendance and the chronic attendance rates were really very, very different. So actually getting all of those people around the table to understand those differences and the importance of what we were doing. And then moving forward, one of the lessons learned about letting perfect get in the way of good, we wanted everything to be perfect, and we hesitated before we jumped in to do what we could do. And I think that delayed what we could have done. So really important, I think, for us, the learning was, let's just start something.
Barbara, I so appreciate that, and I also want to offer that sometimes people think they have to implement district-wide when they begin. And I think you have to have a district-wide or community-wide intent, but you start with the coalition of the willing. So if you see these rates, and then you find a school with a principal, with a community partner, with a number of folks who are willing to jump in and do that work, as long as you make sure that you're learning from that, it's almost taking our picture of what state changes and making it applicable to a local community. Mm-hmm. You can make that work, and you can actually, so maybe you won't get a 10% reduction district-wide, but in that particular elementary school that you chose, you can. And it can then serve as a kind of inspiring beacon of hope for more district-wide change.
And I would add, Hetty, that by starting in places with significant rates of chronic absenteeism, and in particular schools, and targeting those schools, you can actually, if you can show progress in one or two of those schools, you can definitely use that as a platform for broader systemic change. And I think this broader lesson around learning while doing and not holding back until you have the perfect strategy and everything figured out until you actually try to implement something, I think is really good advice. Corinne, are there any questions that we could take really quickly from the chat box before I hand it to Lisa?
No, but we certainly would take questions after the webinar is done and you have all of our email addresses available.
Wonderful. And we'll also be following this webinar with 3 more on other topics. And so thank you, everyone, for participating. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who has some closing remarks. Lisa?
Well, first, I just want to thank everybody for participating in today's discussion. As you can see, this is just the beginning of a 4-part series where we will dive into some other topics that the campaigns for grade level reading are focused on. Our next call will focus on school readiness, specifically in parent engagement, birth to 3, and healthy readers. So we will be announcing that date in the next couple weeks, so please pay attention to your email. I want to thank again Corinne Ribble and Cynthia O'Connor. They are the backbone for New York State and help coordinate the campaign here locally and will help us think about, as funders, how do we coordinate our efforts so that we're achieving success for all of our children throughout the state. Again, I want to thank Ron Fairchild from the campaign who really grounded us today in why the campaign is important and what foundations can do to support this work, and Hetty and Sue from Attendance Works who gave us a lot of amazing data and made the case for attendance, and then Barbara Hubble from the United Way of the Southern Tier who gave us a local example of how one foundation and one funder is approaching and how they're coordinating efforts on the ground. We hope that there's learning in all of these presentations that you've heard today that you can take back to your own communities. And with that, I'm going to close today's conversation. After today's call, you will receive a short survey. We hope that you'll take that so we can make the next 3 conversations very meaningful for you and your work. Again, thank you to everyone for your participation. If you have any questions of any of the speakers, we will send you their contact information so you can follow up with them individually. Have a wonderful day and a great week.